I never imagined I'd be locked out of my own home by my son-in-law, as if I were some stranger. The day he forbade me from entering the garage was the day I knew something terrible was happening. But what I discovered inside would destroy everything I thought I knew about my family. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share, and if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Margaret, and at 73 years old, I wake up every morning in my cramped studio apartment in Astoria, Queens, to the sound of garbage trucks rumbling down Northern Boulevard. The smell of burnt coffee from my ancient percolator mingles with the musty odor of old newspapers I can never seem to throw away. My arthritic hands shake slightly as I pour that first cup, steam rising like the ghosts of better days. For 35 years, I lived in a beautiful 3-bedroom house in Bayside with my late husband, Robert. We raised 3 children there. Watched them take their first steps on the hardwood floors we installed ourselves. Celebrated birthdays in the backyard under the old oak tree that Robert planted the year we moved in. When he passed away 7 years ago, I thought I'd live out my days surrounded by those memories, those walls that held a lifetime of laughter and love. But life has a way of pulling the rug out from under you when you least expect it. My daughter Sarah, my middle child, and the one who always seemed to need me most, married Mark 5 years ago. I'll never forget the wedding day at that fancy venue in Long Island City, overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Mark looked handsome in his rented tuxedo, but something about his smile never quite reached his eyes. Even then, something felt off, like watching a movie where the audio doesn't sync with the picture. Sarah glowed in her grandmother's vintage dress, the one I'd carefully preserved in tissue paper for decades. She clutched my hand during the father-daughter dance, tears streaming down both our faces because Robert wasn't there to walk her down the aisle. I danced with her instead, my feet aching in the uncomfortable heels I'd bought just for the occasion. Mark had big dreams, or so he told everyone who'd listen. He wanted to start his own construction business, build custom homes for wealthy families moving out to the suburbs. He talked about million-dollar contracts and investment opportunities, about stocks and cryptocurrency, and building wealth that would last generations. His confidence was infectious, and Sarah hung on every word like he was promising her the moon. 3 months after the wedding, they came to me with an envelope full of business plans and loan applications. Mark spread the papers across my kitchen table, his thick fingers pointing to numbers that made my head spin. "Mom, this is our chance," Sarah said, her eyes bright with hope I hadn't seen since she was a little girl. "Mark's found investors, but he needs seed money to prove he's serious." I looked at those papers, at my daughter's face, at Mark's confident nod, and I felt the familiar tug of maternal love overriding common sense. How could I say no to my baby girl? How could I deny her the happiness she deserved after watching her struggle through community college and dead-end jobs for years? I took $28,000 from my retirement savings, money Robert and I had scrimped and saved for decades. Money I'd planned to use for home repairs, for a comfortable old age, for emergencies I couldn't even imagine. I handed Mark that cashier's check on a gray October morning, watching him fold it into his wallet like it was just another piece of paper. "Thank you, Mom," Sarah whispered, hugging me tight. "We'll pay you back with interest, I promise." Mark just nodded, shaking my hand with a grip that felt too firm, too practiced. "You won't regret this investment, Mrs. Watson. Family helps family, right?" Those words would echo in my mind for years to come. Within 6 months, Sarah was pregnant with their first child, my grandson Tommy. I spent my days driving between my apartment and their rental house in Flushing, bringing groceries when money was tight, cooking meals when Sarah was too tired to stand, watching Tommy so they could go out for their anniversary dinner or Mark's business meetings. I loved being a grandmother more than I'd ever imagined. Tommy's first word was gamma, and my heart nearly burst with pride when Sarah called me, laughing and crying at the same time. I spent my Social Security checks on diapers and formula and tiny clothes that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Mark's business seemed to take forever to get off the ground. There were always permits delayed, investors backing out, weather problems keeping crews from working. But he kept talking about the big break coming, the contract that would change everything. Sarah believed him completely, and I wanted to believe him too. 2 years later, little Emma was born, a beautiful baby girl with Sarah's green eyes and my late mother's stubborn chin. By then, I was practically living at their house, helping with 2 children under 3 while Sarah recovered from a difficult delivery, and Mark worked longer and longer hours on projects that never seemed to materialize. I remember one evening, folding tiny clothes in their living room while Sarah napped and the babies played on the carpet. Mark came home late, his work boots muddy, his face tight with stress I'd learned not to question. He barely acknowledged the children reaching for him, just poured himself a beer and disappeared into the garage. "Daddy tired," Tommy said in his little voice, and something about the resignation in those 2 words made my chest ache. That garage became Mark's sanctuary, his office, his escape from the chaos of family life. He installed a deadbolt, claimed he needed privacy for important phone calls, space to plan the business that was always just on the verge of success. Sarah didn't question it, and I didn't either. We were all walking on eggshells, afraid to upset the delicate balance of a struggling family. But balance was the last thing we had. The first time Mark asked for more money was on a sweltering July afternoon. I was watching the kids in their inflatable pool while Sarah worked a double shift at the medical office where she'd finally found steady employment. Her hours there were our lifeline, the reliable income that kept the lights on and food in the refrigerator. Mark pulled up in his pickup truck, the same one he'd been driving since before the wedding, despite all his talk about business success. He looked tired, older somehow, like the dreams were weighing him down instead of lifting him up. "Mom, I need to talk to you," he said, his voice carrying something I couldn't quite identify. Desperation, maybe, or calculation. "The business is at a critical point. I've got a chance to bid on a huge project, but I need capital to show I'm legitimate." He spread more papers on the patio table, blueprints and contracts with letterheads from companies I'd never heard of. The numbers were bigger this time, zeros that made my pension feel insignificant. "How much?" I asked, already knowing I wouldn't like the answer. $15,000, just temporary until the contract comes through. Then we'll pay back everything, with interest. This could set us up for life, Mom. Set the kids up for college. I looked through the sliding door at Tommy and Emma, their little faces flushed with joy as they splashed in the cheap plastic pool. They deserved every opportunity, every chance for a better life than their parents were struggling to provide. I took out a second loan against my apartment, using the equity Robert and I had built over 40 years of marriage. The paperwork made me dizzy, all those legal terms and interest rates and warnings about default. But I signed anyway, because what's money compared to family? What's financial security compared to my daughter's happiness and my grandchildren's future? The loan officer, a kind woman about my age, looked at me with concern. "Mrs. Watson, are you sure about this? At your age, this kind of debt." "It's for my family," I said, and that seemed like explanation enough. But months passed, and Mark's big contract never materialized. The business stayed in that perpetual state of almost success, always one permit away, one investor away, one lucky breakaway from changing our lives. Meanwhile, I found myself deeper and deeper in their daily routine, not by invitation, but by necessity. Sarah's job demanded more hours, and childcare was expensive. I picked up the kids from daycare, fed them dinner, bathed them, read bedtime stories until my voice was hoarse. Mark would come home after they were asleep, grab a beer from the refrigerator, and disappear into that locked garage. I started noticing things that didn't add up. New tools in Mark's truck that looked expensive, Restaurant receipts in his pockets when Sarah was eating peanut butter sandwiches for lunch. Phone calls he'd take outside, walking to the end of the driveway where we couldn't hear. One evening, while helping Sarah fold laundry in the bedroom, I found the courage to voice my growing concerns. "Honey, how is Mark's business really doing? I mean, it's been 3 years." Sarah's hands stilled on the tiny shirt she was folding. Her shoulders tensed, and I could see the stress lines around her eyes that hadn't been there on her wedding day. "It's hard, Mom. Construction is competitive. Mark works so hard, but sometimes I wonder." She trailed off, and I waited, hoping she'd share what was really in her heart. But Mark's voice boomed from the hallway. "Sarah, where did you put my work gloves?" The moment passed, and Sarah's guard went back up. "He's doing his best," she said firmly, but her voice carried a tremor that told me she had doubts too. That doubt became a seed that grew in the darkness of unspoken fears. I started paying attention more carefully, the way you do when something doesn't feel right, but you can't quite name it. Mark's schedule became more erratic. He'd leave early in the morning and come back late at night, but when I asked Sarah about specific projects or job sites, her answers were vague. "He's working on a big house in Manhasset," she'd say, or "some commercial project in Nassau County." Never details, never specifics, never invitations to see his work. The garage remained off limits, even to Sarah. When I offered to help organize his tools or clean the space, Mark's response was swift and firm. "It's a workspace, Mom. I can't have things moved around. Too much important paperwork in there." But what kind of paperwork required a deadbolt? What kind of business was so sensitive that a wife couldn't enter her husband's office in her own home? The questions multiplied like weeds in my mind. Then came that November afternoon that changed everything. The sky was the color of old pewter, and the wind off the East River cut through my thin jacket like frozen knives. I'd come to drop off groceries and hopefully spend a few minutes with the grandkids before Sarah got home from work. But no one answered the front door, even though Mark's truck was in the driveway. I walked around to the garage, thinking maybe he was working and hadn't heard the doorbell. The side door was slightly ajar, and I could hear voices inside. I knocked gently and pushed the door open. "Mark?" "It's just me. I brought groceries." He appeared in the doorway before I could see inside, his body blocking my view like a human wall. His face was flushed, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold day. "Mom, you can't come in here anymore?" he said, his voice carrying a hardness I'd never heard before. "This is my workspace. Off limits." Behind him, I caught a glimpse of someone else, a man I didn't recognize, quickly gathering papers from a folding table. The air smelled weird, chemical and sharp, nothing like the motor oil and wood dust you'd expect in a garage workshop. "I just wanted to help," I started, but Mark was already closing the door. "I don't need help, and from now on, call before you come over. We need more privacy." Privacy. The word hit me like a slap. After 3 years of being their unpaid babysitter, cook, and financier, I needed to call for permission to visit my own daughter and grandchildren. I stood there on their cracked driveway, holding a bag of groceries I'd bought with money I couldn't really afford, feeling smaller and more invisible than I'd felt since Robert's funeral. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that man in the garage, the smell, Mark's panic when I'd tried to enter. What was he hiding? And more importantly, what did Sarah know about it? The next few weeks passed in a haze of growing suspicion and hurt. My visits became more sporadic, partly because I was hurt by Mark's rejection, and partly because I was afraid of what I might discover. Sarah seemed more distant too, like she was carrying a weight she couldn't share. But it was my grandson Tommy who finally broke my heart completely. I was babysitting one evening while Sarah worked late again. Emma was asleep in her crib, and Tommy was coloring at the kitchen table, his little tongue poking out in concentration the way Sarah used to do when she was his age. "Gamma," he said suddenly, looking up at me with those serious eyes that seemed too old for a 3-year-old. "Why Daddy get so mad at Mommy?" My heart clenched. What do you mean, sweetheart? Daddy yells. Mommy cries. I hear them in the garage sometimes. Children notice everything, even when we think they're too young to understand. Tommy's innocent words confirmed what I'd been afraid to acknowledge. Something was very wrong in my daughter's marriage, and that locked garage was at the center of it. That weekend, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. I was going to find out what Mark was hiding, even if it meant risking the fragile peace I'd been trying to maintain. I called Sarah on Saturday morning, keeping my voice carefully casual. Honey, I was thinking of taking the kids to the zoo today. Give you and Mark some time alone together. She sounded relieved, maybe even grateful. That would be wonderful, Mom. We both need a break. But when I arrived to pick up Tommy and Emma, only Sarah was there. Mark had left early for a job site emergency, she explained, but her eyes didn't meet mine. We spent a lovely day at the Bronx Zoo, watching the children's faces light up at the tigers and elephants. For a few hours, I could pretend everything was normal, that we were just a grandmother enjoying time with her grandchildren. But as evening approached and we headed back to Queens, my stomach knotted with anxiety about what I might discover. I dropped the kids off at home, where Sarah was waiting with dinner already prepared. She looked tired, stressed, older than her 32 years. Mark still hadn't returned, and she didn't seem to expect him anytime soon. Mom, can I ask you something? Sarah said as I helped her get the children ready for bed. Of course, honey. Anything. She was quiet for a long moment, braiding Emma's hair with shaking fingers. Do you think people can change? I mean, really change, from who they used to be? The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire you can't quite locate. I wanted to ask what she meant, who she was thinking about, but something in her expression warned me not to push. People can grow, I said carefully. But their core nature, their values, I think those stay pretty consistent. She nodded, but I could see tears gathering in her eyes. I just keep hoping. Hoping what, sweetheart? But Mark's truck was pulling into the driveway, and the moment passed. Sarah wiped her eyes quickly, put on the mask of normalcy that I was beginning to recognize, and went to greet her husband with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I left that evening with more questions than answers, and a growing certainty that my daughter was in some kind of trouble she couldn't or wouldn't discuss. The breaking point came 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday that started like any other, but ended with my world turned completely upside down. I'd gone to their house to pick up Tommy for a doctor's appointment. Sarah was at work, and Mark was supposed to be watching Emma, but when I arrived, the house was eerily quiet. I used my spare key to enter, calling out to announce myself. Mark, it's Mom. I'm here for Tommy's appointment. No answer. The living room was a mess. Toys scattered everywhere, Emma's breakfast dishes still on the high chair. I felt a chill of worry as I searched the house, calling their names. Finally, I heard voices from the garage. Loud voices, aggressive and angry. I couldn't make out words, but the tone was unmistakable. Someone was arguing, and it was escalating quickly. I crept toward the garage door, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. The voices were clearer now, and I could definitely hear Mark. But there were others too. Strangers in my daughter's home, strangers who sounded dangerous. Then I heard something that made my blood freeze. Emma crying. My 18-month-old granddaughter was in that garage with those angry voices, and I had no idea where Tommy was. I tried the door handle, but it was locked. I knocked, gently at first, then more insistently when the crying continued. Mark, is everything okay? Where are the children? The voices stopped abruptly. Heavy footsteps approached the door, and Mark opened it just a crack, his body filling the gap so I couldn't see inside. Everything's fine, Mom. Just some business associates. The kids they're fine. But Emma's crying continued, and I could hear fear in those tiny sobs that made every maternal instinct I possessed scream in alarm. I need to see the children, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. Tommy has a doctor's appointment." The appointment was canceled, Mark said quickly. "Sarah called. She'll explain later." But Sarah hadn't called me. I would have remembered. And Emma was still crying, a sound that was breaking my heart and filling me with a fury I hadn't felt in years. "Mark, let me in. Now." I used the voice I'd once used when my children were misbehaving, the voice that brooked no argument. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Fear? Guilt? But then his expression hardened. "No, Mom. This is my house, my garage, my business. You need to leave." He started to close the door, but I wedged my foot in the gap. "Where is Tommy?" "He's at a friend's house." "Everything is fine. You're being paranoid." But everything was not fine. I could feel it in the air, smell it in the chemical odor that was stronger now, see it in the way Mark's hands shook as he gripped the door. I left that day, but I didn't go home. Instead, I drove to a coffee shop in Flushing and sat there for 2 hours, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea I never drank, trying to process what I'd experienced. My granddaughter had been in that garage with strangers who were clearly agitated about something. My grandson was supposedly at a friend's house, but Mark couldn't tell me which friend. The smell, the secrecy, the panic in Mark's eyes when I'd tried to enter. None of it made sense if he was running a legitimate construction business. But what was the alternative? What could be so terrible that he'd lock his own children in a garage with dangerous strangers? I thought about all the money I'd lent him over the years, all the failed business ventures and missed opportunities. I thought about Sarah's growing isolation, her questions about whether people could change, her tears that she tried so hard to hide. And I made a decision that would have terrified the woman I'd been a year earlier. I was going to find out the truth, whatever it took. That evening, I called my neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez, who had become a good friend since I'd moved to the apartment in Astoria. Carmen was 75, a retired teacher who'd raised 6 children and knew how to listen without judgment. "Carmen, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course, mija. What's wrong?" I told her everything: the locked garage, the money I'd lent, the strange smells and secretive behavior, the fear I'd seen in Sarah's eyes. Carmen listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of concern or disapproval. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Margaret, I think you know what you need to do. The question is whether you're brave enough to do it." "What do you mean?" "You need proof. Real proof. Not just suspicions and bad feelings. Because if you're right about what's happening, your daughter and those babies are in real danger. And if you're wrong, well, then you'll know you're wrong. And you can stop worrying." Carmen was right, of course. But how could I get proof when I was banned from the garage? How could I protect my family when I didn't even know what they needed protection from? "There are ways," Carmen said quietly. "If you're serious about this, if you really believe those children are at risk, there are ways to find out the truth." The next morning, Carmen took me to a small electronics store in Jackson Heights, run by her nephew Miguel. I felt foolish explaining what I needed, a small camera that could record without being detected. But Miguel neither judged nor questioned my request. "Many grandmothers come here," he said kindly. "Sometimes we need to protect our familia, see?" He showed me a device smaller than my thumb, with a battery that would record for hours and memory that could store days of footage. It looked like a small black button, innocent and ordinary. "You place it where there is good view but nobody looks," Miguel explained. "Up high is best, where shadows hide it. It records everything, sound and picture." I paid for the camera with money I'd been saving for Christmas presents. Money that felt precious when every dollar had to stretch. But what price could I put on my family's safety? Installing it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Carmen and I waited until Sarah called to ask if I could babysit while she and Mark went to dinner for their anniversary. It was a Saturday evening in late November, and the early darkness would help hide what we were doing. I arrived at their house with a casserole and my grandmother's best acting skills. Mark was in the shower, and Sarah was getting ready in the bedroom. The children were playing in the living room, the television providing perfect cover for any small sounds we might make. Carmen had come with me, pretending to help carry groceries. While I distracted the kids with a new book, she slipped into the garage through the side door that Mark had left unlocked in his haste to get ready for their evening out. 2 minutes later, she was back, nodding slightly to let me know the camera was in place. "Have a wonderful evening," I told Sarah when she emerged looking beautiful in a dress I'd helped her pick out months earlier. "You both deserve to spend some time together." Mark barely acknowledged me, just grabbed his keys and wallet from the counter. But I noticed he checked that the garage door was locked before they left. That night, after the children were asleep, I sat in their living room staring at that locked door and wondering what secrets lay just beyond it. The camera was recording everything now, storing evidence of whatever Mark was hiding. But evidence of what? And was I prepared for what I might discover? The next few weeks were torture. I went about my daily routine: grocery shopping, doctor appointments, volunteer work at the church. But my mind was constantly on that tiny camera hidden in the garage. Every time my phone rang, I wondered if it was Sarah calling with news, or the police, or worse. Mark seemed more paranoid than ever. He changed the locks on the garage and installed additional security measures I couldn't identify. Sarah looked increasingly hollow, like she was disappearing from the inside out. But it was little Tommy who provided the clue that made everything fall into place. I was babysitting again, making grilled cheese sandwiches while the children played in the living room. Tommy came into the kitchen, dragging his favorite stuffed elephant, and climbed onto my lap with the trust that only grandchildren possess. "Gamma, what's cooking?" The question seemed innocent enough, but something in his tone made me look at him more carefully. His little face was serious, worried in a way no 3-year-old should have to be. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "In Daddy's garage. Something's always cooking, smells funny, makes Mommy's eyes red." My heart started racing. "What kind of smell, Tommy?" He wrinkled his nose, thinking hard about how to describe something he was too young to understand. Like when Mommy cleans the bathroom, but stronger. Makes my throat hurt sometimes. Cleaning chemicals, strong chemical smells that made people's eyes red and hurt children's throats, combined with the secrecy, the locked doors, the strangers, the money problems that never seemed to improve despite Mark's claims of business success. I felt sick as the pieces finally clicked into place. Mark wasn't running a construction business. He was running something much more dangerous, something that required chemical processes and secrecy and dangerous associates, something that was putting my daughter and grandchildren at risk every single day. I needed to get that camera back, and I needed to get my family out of that house. But first, I had to see the evidence with my own eyes, no matter how horrible it might be. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Sarah called me on a Thursday morning, her voice tight with stress. "Mom, I need a huge favor. Mark's grandmother is in the hospital in Albany. We need to drive up there right now, and we'll probably be gone overnight. Can you watch the kids?" "Of course, honey. Whatever you need." "We'll drop them off at your apartment in an hour. Is that okay?" It was more than okay. It was exactly what I needed. The house empty, and 24 hours to retrieve that camera and see what it had recorded. After settling Tommy and Emma in my small apartment with enough toys and snacks to keep them happy, I called Carmen. "It's time," I told her. "They're gone until tomorrow." Carmen didn't ask any questions. She just came over to help with the children while I drove back to Sarah's house with hands that shook so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. The house felt different, empty. Bigger somehow, but also more ominous. Every shadow seemed threatening. Every creak of the old floorboards made me jump. I checked all the locks twice before approaching the garage. The side door had a new deadbolt, But Carmen's nephew had anticipated this possibility. Miguel had given me a small tool that could manipulate most residential locks, along with very clear instructions that I was never to tell anyone where I'd learned this skill. It took me 20 minutes of fumbling with shaking hands, but finally the lock clicked open. The garage was dark and cold, smelling of those harsh chemicals Tommy had described. I used my phone's flashlight to navigate between tables covered with equipment I didn't recognize: scales, glass containers, tubes, and burners that looked like some kind of chemistry set. But this wasn't a chemistry experiment. This was a laboratory for manufacturing something illegal, something dangerous enough that Mark had been willing to risk his family's safety to protect it. I found the camera exactly where Carmen had placed it, hidden in the shadows above the main work area. My hands trembled as I carefully removed it, hoping desperately that it had captured evidence of what was happening in this space. Then I heard a car door slam in the driveway. They were back early. Sarah and Mark were back, and I was standing in the middle of their illegal operation with a hidden camera in my pocket and no reasonable explanation for my presence. I had perhaps 30 seconds to get out of the garage and figure out what to do next. But 30 seconds is an eternity when your mind is racing and your body is frozen with fear. I heard Sarah's voice through the front door, tired and worried. "I should check on the kids. I feel terrible leaving them with Mom overnight when Emma's been so fussy." "The kids are fine," Mark replied, his voice sharp with impatience. "We need to get back on the road. Grandma's not getting any better." But I could hear footsteps approaching, and I knew I was running out of time. I managed to lock the garage door and slip around to the backyard just as the front door opened. My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure they could hear it from inside the house. I waited in the shadows behind their storage shed, holding my breath and praying they wouldn't notice any signs of my presence in the garage. The camera in my pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I heard Mark's voice again. "Something's not right in the garage. The temperature's off, and I swear I smell fresh air." "Maybe you didn't close the door properly when we left," Sarah suggested, but her voice carried a new note of anxiety. "I always check the door. Always." Mark's voice was getting closer, and I realized he was coming outside to investigate. I crept along the fence line toward the front of the house, staying in the shadows and moving as quietly as my 73-year-old joints would allow. My car was parked 2 blocks away, deliberately placed to avoid suspicion. But 2 blocks felt like 2 miles when you're running from something you can't explain. I made it to my car just as Mark emerged from the backyard, flashlight in hand, searching for evidence of an intruder. I sat there in the darkness, watching him pace the perimeter of the house, and realized that my life had just changed completely. I was no longer a grandmother who worried about her struggling family. I was now someone in possession of evidence of criminal activity, evidence that could send my son-in-law to prison and destroy my daughter's marriage. But I was also someone who finally understood why Sarah had been asking if people could change, why she cried when she thought no one was watching, why she'd grown so thin and hollow in recent months. She knew. Maybe not everything, but she knew enough to be afraid. The drive back to my apartment was a blur of city lights and racing thoughts. Tommy and Emma were asleep on my couch when I returned, looking so innocent and peaceful that I wanted to gather them up and never let them return to that house. Carmen took one look at my face and immediately put the kettle on for tea. "You found what you were looking for," she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, still unable to speak about what I'd seen. "And now you have to decide what to do about it." I spent that night sitting at my kitchen table, staring at the tiny camera that contained evidence of crimes I couldn't even name. Tommy and Emma slept peacefully in my bedroom, unaware that their lives were about to change forever. What kind of grandmother was I? The kind who protected her family's secrets, even when those secrets were destroying them? Or the kind who did the right thing, even when it meant destroying everything they thought they knew about their lives? By morning, I knew what I had to do. But first, I had to see the evidence for myself. I had to understand exactly what Mark had been doing in that garage, and how long it had been putting my daughter and grandchildren at risk. Carmen's nephew Miguel met us at his electronics store early the next morning, before it officially opened. He helped me transfer the camera's contents to a laptop we could watch, warning me that some evidence was difficult to process. Sometimes, señora, the truth is harder than the not knowing. Are you sure you want to see this? I wasn't sure of anything anymore, but I nodded anyway. The footage was date-stamped, showing me exactly when each recording had been made. Hours of mundane activity, Mark working alone, occasionally meeting with the same man I'd glimpsed weeks earlier. But as I watched, the pattern became clear and horrifying. Mark wasn't just manufacturing drugs in that garage. He was using my granddaughter as cover for his activities. The recordings showed him bringing Emma into the laboratory space, setting her in a playpen while he worked with dangerous chemicals just feet away. She played with her toys while he weighed and packaged substances that could kill her if she accidentally ingested them. And there was worse. Much worse. The camera had captured Mark's temper when Emma cried, or Tommy asked innocent questions about the smells. I watched my son-in-law grab my 3-year-old grandson by the arm hard enough to leave bruises, watched him shout at a baby who couldn't understand why Daddy was so angry. But the most heartbreaking footage was of Sarah herself. She appeared in several recordings, usually late at night when she thought the children were asleep. The camera captured conversations between her and Mark that made my blood run cold. "This has to stop," she said in one recording, her voice shaking with fear or exhaustion. "The children are getting sick from the fumes. Emma's been coughing for weeks." "The children are fine," Mark snapped back. "And this business is keeping a roof over their heads. Over your head. You want to go back to living in your mother's spare room?" "I want my children to be safe. I want them to grow up in a home that isn't. This is temporary. Just until we build up enough capital to move the operation somewhere else, somewhere bigger." "You've been saying that for 2 years. Mark, 2 years of putting our babies at risk for your get-rich-quick schemes." The argument escalated from there, and I watched my daughter shrink into herself as her husband's voice grew louder and more threatening. She was trapped, I realized. Trapped by fear, by financial dependence, by the knowledge that leaving would mean admitting to everyone, including me, that her marriage was a disaster. But she was also trapped by love. Even through the grainy camera footage, I could see that Sarah still loved the man she'd married, still hoped he would become the husband and father she needed him to be. The final recording was the most damning. It showed Mark with several men I didn't recognize, all of them handling packages and counting money in amounts that made my small loans look insignificant. Thousands of dollars changed hands while my grandchildren slept just yards away, completely unaware that their home had become a distribution center for illegal drugs. I turned off the laptop and sat in Miguel's quiet shop, overwhelmed by the weight of what I'd witnessed. Carmen rubbed my shoulders while I cried, for my daughter's shattered dreams, for my grandchildren's stolen innocence, for the family I'd thought I was protecting. "What do I do now?" I whispered. Carmen's voice was gentle but firm. "Now you save them. All of them, even if they don't want to be saved." I knew she was right. But knowing what to do and having the courage to do it are two very different things. The first call I made was to a lawyer Carmen recommended, a woman named Patricia Hernandez, who specialized in family law and domestic violence cases. Patricia had built her practice helping women escape dangerous situations, and she understood immediately why I needed help. "Mrs. Watson, what you've described puts your daughter and grandchildren in immediate physical danger. The chemicals involved in drug manufacturing can cause respiratory problems, brain damage, and developmental issues in children. And that's assuming there's never an accident. Explosions and fires are common in these operations." I felt sick listening to her enumerate the risks my family faced every day. What are my options? You can turn the evidence over to the police and let them handle it through criminal charges. That's the fastest way to ensure the operation is shut down and your family is removed from danger. But it also means your son-in-law will likely face serious prison time. Your daughter may be charged as an accessory if she knew about the operation. And the children will be thrust into the chaos of a criminal investigation. It's the right thing to do, but it's not easy. Patricia was right about that. Nothing about this situation was going to be easy. But I kept thinking about Emma's cough, about Tommy's innocent question about why something was always cooking in Daddy's garage, about Sarah's hollow eyes and the way she flinched when Mark raised his voice. I thought about the money I'd lent over the years, money that had probably bought equipment for manufacturing drugs rather than tools for legitimate construction work. I'd been an unwitting accomplice in my own family's destruction. That realization gave me the courage I needed. I want to talk to my daughter first, I told Patricia. She deserves to know what's coming, and she deserves a chance to protect herself and the children. Patricia nodded approvingly. That's wise. If she's willing to cooperate with authorities, it will go much easier for her. But Mrs. Watson, you need to understand, once you start this process, there's no going back. Your family will never be the same. I already knew my family would never be the same. The only question was whether it would be destroyed by Mark's criminal activities or saved by the truth. I called Sarah that evening and asked her to meet me for coffee the next morning. She sounded surprised. We hadn't had a mother-daughter conversation without the children present in months, but agreed to meet at a small cafe in Bayside. She looked terrible when she arrived, thin and exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. She ordered black coffee and picked at a muffin she didn't seem to want, avoiding eye contact with me across the small table. Sarah, honey, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. She looked up then, and I saw fear flicker across her face. What is it, Mom? What is Mark really doing in that garage? The question hung between us like a loaded gun. I watched my daughter's face cycle through denial, calculation, and finally resignation. I don't know what you mean, she said, but her voice carried no conviction. Yes, you do. The locked doors, the chemical smells, the strange men coming and going at all hours. The fact that his construction business never seems to actually construct anything. Sarah's hands shook as she raised her coffee cup. Mom, please don't ask me questions I can't answer. You can answer them. You just don't want to. She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee like it might provide the answers she couldn't give voice to. If I tell you the truth, what happens then? Then we figure out how to protect you and the children. And Mark? I reached across the table and took her hand. Honey, Mark made his choices. Now we have to make ours. Sarah began to cry then, quietly at first, but with increasing intensity as months of suppressed fear and anxiety finally found their release. I've known for a year, she whispered. Maybe longer. I kept telling myself it was something else, some kind of legitimate business I just didn't understand. But the amounts of money, the secrecy, the people he associates with. What finally convinced you? Emma got really sick last month. High fever, trouble breathing, rash all over her arms. The doctor said it looked like chemical exposure. Asked if we'd been using any new cleaning products, or if there'd been any industrial accidents in our neighborhood. My heart clenched as I thought of my precious granddaughter suffering from the toxic environment her father had created. That's when I knew for sure that whatever Mark was doing was poisoning our children. But I didn't know how to stop it. I don't have anywhere to go, Mom. I don't have money saved up or job skills that pay enough to support the kids on my own. And Mark, he's made it very clear what would happen if I ever tried to leave. What do you mean? Sarah rolled up the sleeve of her sweater, revealing bruises on her forearm in the distinctive pattern of fingerprints. He doesn't hit me in places that show, and he's never hurt the children directly. But the threats are getting worse, and I'm scared of what he might do if he thinks I'm going to expose him. I stared at those bruises, evidence that my daughter was living in an abusive marriage on top of everything else. How had I missed the signs? How had I been so focused on the financial strain and the locked garage that I'd failed to see my daughter was being hurt? Sarah, I have something to show you, something that might change how we handle this situation. I pulled out my phone and showed her some of the less disturbing footage from the hidden camera. I watched her face as she saw the drug manufacturing equipment, the dangerous chemicals, the men counting money while her children slept nearby. But it was the footage of Mark grabbing Tommy that broke her completely. "Oh, God," she sobbed. "Oh, God, I didn't know he was hurting Tommy. I thought he was just stressed, that he would never actually hurt the children." "He's hurting all of you, honey. And it's going to get worse unless we stop it." Sarah sat there crying for several minutes while I held her hand and tried to process the magnitude of what we were facing. My daughter was trapped in an abusive marriage with a man who was manufacturing drugs in their family home, endangering her children's health and safety every single day. And I was the one who'd helped finance it with my loans and my silence. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked finally. "We get you and the children out of that house, tonight, and then we turn the evidence over to the police and let them handle Mark." Sarah's face went white. "Mom, I can't. If Mark goes to prison, if people find out what was happening, the children will grow up knowing their father is a criminal. They'll be humiliated, traumatized." "They'll be alive," I said firmly, "and they'll be healthy. Everything else we can work through together." It took another hour of conversation, tears, and gentle persuasion before Sarah finally agreed to leave Mark that night. We made a plan. She would go home, pack essential items for herself and the children, while Mark was at one of his evening business meetings, and bring them to my apartment. In the morning, we would turn the evidence over to the police and file for an emergency restraining order. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was a start. Sarah left the cafe with red eyes, but something approaching determination in her posture. For the first time in months, she looked like the strong young woman I'd raised rather than the frightened, hollow person she'd become. I spent the afternoon preparing my small apartment for 3 additional occupants. I moved furniture to make room for the children to play, stocked up on groceries and diapers, and called Patricia Hernandez to let her know we were moving forward with involving the authorities. But at 8 o'clock that evening, when Sarah should have been arriving with the children, my phone rang instead. "Mom." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper, and I could hear crying in the background. "What's wrong? Where are you?" "He knows. Somehow he knows that I was planning to leave. He came home early and saw the suitcases. He's not going to let us go." My blood turned to ice. "Where are you now?" "Locked in the bedroom with the kids. He took my car keys and my phone. I'm calling from Tommy's toy phone, but I don't think it will work much longer." "Sarah, listen to me carefully. I'm calling the police right now. Keep that door locked and don't let him in, no matter what he says." "Mom, I'm scared. He's never been this angry before. And he keeps talking about how he can't let me ruin everything he's worked for." The call ended abruptly, and I immediately dialed 911. "911, what's your emergency?" "My daughter and grandchildren are being held against their will by her husband. He's involved in illegal drug manufacturing, and I have evidence. They're in immediate danger." The dispatcher took down all the information efficiently, but every second that passed felt like an hour, while Sarah and the children remained trapped in that house with an increasingly desperate criminal. I drove to their house despite the dispatcher's instructions to stay away, parking across the street where I could see but wouldn't interfere with police operations. Within minutes, squad cars arrived with lights flashing but sirens silent. I watched from my car as officers surrounded the house, called out instructions through a bullhorn, and finally forced entry when Mark refused to respond. The next hour was a blur of activity. Paramedics checking on Sarah and the children, officers in hazmat suits investigating the garage, neighbors gathering on the sidewalk to gawk at the chaos. But the moment that will stay with me forever was seeing my daughter and grandchildren carried out of that house by police officers, finally safe from the toxic environment that had been slowly poisoning them for years. Sarah looked like a ghost, pale and shaking but holding her children tightly. Tommy clutched his stuffed elephant and stared at the flashing lights with wide eyes, while Emma slept against her mother's shoulder, finally breathing clean air for the first time in months. Mark was led away in handcuffs, still shouting about how this was all a misunderstanding, how he was just trying to provide for his family. Even in defeat, he couldn't acknowledge the harm he'd caused the people who should have mattered most to him. The police found exactly what the hidden camera had revealed: a sophisticated drug manufacturing operation that had been running for over 2 years. They also found financial records showing that my loans had indeed been used to purchase equipment and supplies for illegal activities. I felt sick knowing that my desire to help my family had inadvertently contributed to their suffering. But Patricia Hernandez reminded me that Mark had manipulated all of us, that his lies and deception were not our fault. "You saved them," she said simply. "When it mattered most, you had the courage to do the right thing." The legal proceedings took months. Mark was charged with multiple felonies including drug manufacturing, child endangerment, and domestic violence. The evidence from my hidden camera was crucial in securing his conviction and a prison sentence of 8 years. Sarah was not charged, thanks to the evidence showing she was a victim rather than a willing participant. But she struggled with guilt and trauma from her years of living in fear and denial. The children underwent medical evaluations that confirmed what we'd suspected. Both Tommy and Emma showed evidence of chemical exposure, though fortunately nothing that couldn't heal with time and proper care. They came to live with me temporarily, while Sarah got back on her feet, and my small apartment became filled with toys and laughter and the beautiful chaos of family life. It wasn't the retirement I'd planned, but it was exactly what all of us needed. Sarah found a better job with health insurance and started therapy to process what she'd experienced. Slowly, the hollow look in her eyes was replaced by something I hadn't seen in years: hope. Tommy's nightmares faded as he learned that Daddy couldn't hurt anyone anymore, that the bad smells were gone forever, that his family was finally safe. Emma's cough disappeared, and she began gaining the weight she'd lost during those months of toxic exposure. And I learned something important about myself: that even at 73, I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. That love for family could give you the courage to do impossible things. That sometimes saving the people you love means destroying the illusions that have been sheltering them from truth. The money I'd lent Mark was never recovered. It had been spent on equipment that was destroyed and drugs that had long since been sold. But I discovered that financial security mattered much less than physical and emotional safety. My retirement savings were depleted, but my family was whole. 6 months after Mark's conviction, Sarah and the children moved into a small apartment just a few blocks away from mine. Close enough that I could help with childcare and family dinners, far enough that they could build their own new life. Sarah started dating again, cautiously and carefully, but with the wisdom that comes from surviving something terrible. The children adapted with the resilience that young people possess, though we all continued therapy to process the trauma they'd experienced. And I found new purpose in speaking out about the signs of domestic abuse and drug activity in family homes. Patricia connected me with support groups for grandparents who'd had to intervene to protect their families from dangerous situations. I learned that my experience wasn't unique, that many older adults find themselves in the position of having to choose between family loyalty and family safety. It's never an easy choice, but it's always the right choice to protect children from harm. As I write this story, 2 years after that terrible November day when everything changed, I can see my grandchildren playing in the courtyard outside my apartment window. Tommy is teaching Emma to ride a tricycle, both of them laughing in the afternoon sunshine. They're healthy now, their lungs clear of chemical residue, their bodies free from the chronic stress of living in a dangerous environment. They still mention their daddy sometimes, usually with confusion rather than trauma. and we answer their questions honestly but age-appropriately. Sarah has grown stronger and more confident than I've ever seen her. She owns her own car now, has her own savings account, makes her own decisions about her life and her future. She thanks me regularly for having the courage to intervene when she couldn't save herself. But I know the truth. She would have found the strength eventually. I just helped her find it sooner, before more damage was done to her precious children. The hardest part of this experience wasn't confronting Mark or involving the police or dealing with the legal system. The hardest part was accepting that I'd missed so many warning signs, that I'd been so focused on being helpful, that I'd failed to see how much help was actually needed. I replay those years sometimes, wondering what would have happened if I'd asked harder questions sooner, if I'd trusted my instincts about the locked garage, if I'd recognized the signs of abuse that were hiding in plain sight. But dwelling on what I should have done differently doesn't change anything. The only thing that matters is what we do with the truth once we finally see it clearly. Today, Tommy is 5 years old and starting kindergarten in the fall. He's curious and funny and shows no lasting effects from his early exposure to toxic chemicals. Emma is 3, with her mother's green eyes and her great-grandmother's stubborn independence. They call me Gamma, just like they always have, but our relationship is different now. It's built on truth instead of secrets, on genuine love instead of obligation, on the solid foundation of a family that survived something terrible together. Sarah and I have become closer than we've ever been, bonded not just by biology but by the shared experience of fighting for our family's survival. We talk openly now about difficult things, about red flags and warning signs, and the importance of trusting your instincts when something feels wrong. And we talk about forgiveness, not for Mark, whose choices put his own children in danger, but for ourselves. For the times we didn't see what was right in front of us, for the mistakes we made while trying to hold our family together, for the strength it took to finally tear it apart in order to save it. As I watch my grandchildren play, I think about the kind of grandmother I want to be for the years ahead. Not the kind who enables destructive behavior out of misplaced loyalty. Not the kind who stays silent when speaking up could save lives. I want to be the kind of grandmother who models courage, who shows them that love sometimes means making hard choices, who teaches them that protecting family isn't the same as protecting family secrets. I want them to know that it's never too late to change course when you realize you're heading in the wrong direction. That being 73 doesn't mean you can't learn new things about yourself and the people you love. Most of all, I want them to know that real family, the kind worth fighting for, is built on truth and safety and unconditional love, not on shared secrets and silent suffering. The other day, Tommy asked me why Daddy had to go away. It's a question he asks periodically, usually when something reminds him of the time before. A smell, a sound, a glimpse of something on television. I sat down next to him and chose my words carefully, the way I've learned to do. Sometimes people make choices that hurt the people they're supposed to protect, I told him. Daddy made some very bad choices that made it unsafe for you and Emma and Mommy to live with him. Will he ever come back? Not for a very long time. And when he does come back, he'll have to prove that he's learned to make better choices before he can be around our family again. Tommy nodded solemnly, processing this information with the seriousness that children bring to difficult truths. But you and Mommy will keep us safe? Always, I promised him. No matter what, we will always keep you safe. It's a promise I intend to keep for the rest of my life. Looking back on this experience, I'm struck by how quickly everything changed once I finally faced the truth. For years, I'd been enabling a dangerous situation by refusing to ask hard questions, by accepting explanations that didn't make sense, by prioritizing family harmony over family safety. But once I decided to act on my suspicions, once I chose courage over comfort, everything shifted. The hidden camera provided the evidence I needed, the lawyer gave me the guidance to use it effectively, and the police had the power to end the immediate danger. The entire process, from installing the camera to Mark's arrest, took less than 2 months. 2 months to save my daughter and grandchildren from a situation that could have killed them. I think about that sometimes when I encounter other grandparents who express concern about their adult children's relationships or living situations. How many of us stay silent because we don't want to interfere? How many of us witness warning signs but convince ourselves it's none of our business? I understand the impulse to stay out of adult children's lives, to respect their independence and avoid being seen as meddling. But there's a difference between respecting boundaries and ignoring danger. Children can't protect themselves from toxic environments. Abuse victims often can't escape without help. Sometimes loving someone means being willing to risk their anger in order to ensure their safety. I share this story not because I want praise for my actions, but because I want other grandparents to know that it's never too late to intervene when children are at risk. That age and financial limitations don't disqualify you from being a protector and advocate for your family. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do is the hardest thing you can imagine. My relationship with money has changed too, as a result of this experience. For years after Robert's death, I measured my worth by how much I could give to my family, how many problems I could solve with loans and gifts and unpaid labor. I thought being a good grandmother meant saying yes to every request, meeting every need, avoiding any situation that might cause conflict or disappointment. But I learned that real generosity isn't about giving people what they ask for. It's about giving them what they actually need, even when they don't want it. Sarah needed safety more than she needed money. The children needed a healthy environment more than they needed expensive toys. And I needed to be a protector more than I needed to be popular. These days, I'm much more careful about financial assistance to family members. I ask harder questions about how money will be used. I pay service providers directly instead of handing over cash. And I maintain financial independence that allows me to help in genuine emergencies without compromising my own security. It's a lesson I learned too late to prevent the damage that was done, but not too late to prevent future harm. I also stay involved in the legal system that helped save my family. I volunteer with a victim advocacy organization, helping other families navigate the complex process of escaping domestic violence and drug-related crimes. It's difficult work, hearing story after story of families torn apart by addiction and abuse and criminal activity. But it's also hopeful work, because I get to see the strength and resilience that emerges when people finally receive the help they need. Last month, I helped a grandmother very much like my former self. A woman whose son-in-law was exhibiting increasingly erratic behavior, whose daughter was losing weight and withdrawing from family activities, whose grandchildren were showing signs of chronic stress. I sat with her in the same coffee shop where Sarah first admitted what she'd been hiding, and I helped her recognize the warning signs I'd missed for so long. Together, we developed a plan to document concerning behavior, to approach her daughter with compassion rather than accusations, and to involve appropriate authorities when evidence warranted intervention. It's too early to know how that situation will resolve, but the grandmother left our meeting with resources, support, and the knowledge that she wasn't alone in her concerns. That's what I wish I'd had during those early years when I sensed something was wrong but didn't know how to address it. Someone who'd been through a similar experience. Someone who understood the complex emotions involved in protecting your family from itself. As difficult as my experience was, I'm grateful to be able to use it to help other families avoid the worst outcomes. To show other grandparents that concern for family doesn't have to equal helplessness. That love can be both gentle and fierce. The children are calling for me now, their voices carrying up from the courtyard where they're playing with the neighborhood kids. It's almost dinner time, and Sarah will be home from work soon for our weekly family meal. These Sunday dinners have become a sacred tradition, a time for all of us to come together and share the week's joys and challenges. We cook together, laugh together, sometimes cry together when memories surface or milestones are reached. But mostly we celebrate how far we've all come from that terrible time when Emma was coughing from toxic fumes and Tommy was afraid of his father's anger and Sarah was trapped in a marriage that was slowly killing her spirit. Tonight, Sarah is bringing a man she's been dating for several months, a kind, patient teacher who makes her laugh and treats the children with genuine affection. It's still early in their relationship, but he represents something important: Sarah's growing confidence in her ability to choose partners who will enrich rather than endanger her life. The children are excited about the possibility of a new father figure, but they're also secure in the knowledge that their primary family, their mother, their grandmother, and each other, is strong enough to weather any changes that might come. As I head downstairs to meet my grandchildren, I think about the woman I was 3 years ago, anxious, confused, financially stressed, and increasingly isolated from the family I was trying so hard to help. That woman would never have imagined herself capable of installing hidden cameras, confronting criminals, or testifying in court proceedings. She would never have believed she had the strength to make decisions that would fundamentally alter her family's structure and future. But she also would never have imagined the peace that comes from living in truth, the joy that emerges when children are truly safe, or the deep satisfaction of knowing you fought for the people who mattered most when it counted most. If you're listening to this story and recognizing elements of your own family situation, I want you to know that you're not alone. That the instincts that are telling you something is wrong are probably right. That protecting children and vulnerable adults is always worth the temporary disruption it might cause to family relationships. And I want you to know that help is available, that you don't have to figure everything out by yourself. There are lawyers who specialize in family crises, police officers trained to handle domestic situations, social workers who understand the complex dynamics of abuse and addiction. There are also grandparents like me who've walked this difficult path and survived to tell about it. We understand the fear and guilt and confusion that comes with realizing someone you love is hurting other people you love. We know how hard it is to choose truth over comfort, action over denial. But we also know that families can heal from terrible wounds if they're willing to face reality and get appropriate help. That children are more resilient than we give them credit for. That love can survive even the most devastating betrayals if it's grounded in honesty and safety rather than secrets and fear. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where protecting your family meant going against your family? Have you had to choose between keeping peace and ensuring safety? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Together, we can support each other through these impossible decisions and celebrate the courage it takes to put genuine love above false loyalty. And if this story touched your heart or opened your eyes to something you needed to see, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Your support helps me continue sharing these difficult but important stories with families who might need to hear them. Because no one should have to face these challenges alone, and no child should have to grow up in danger because the adults who love them are afraid to act. Thank you for listening to my story. Take care of yourselves and each other.